They called her Ash Tongue because she ate last, when the stew was cold and scraped from the bottom of the pot. They called her Ghost Foot because she was taught to move through the pack house without a sound, a shadow meant to be felt, no more than seen. They called her Worthless. That name, she believed. The cold was a living thing. It seeped through the worn leather of her boots, through the threadbare wool of her cloak, and sank its teeth deep into her bones. Alara's fingers were numb, clumsy hooks as she hauled another splintery log from the woodpile. The wind, a razor fresh from the strop, sliced across her cheeks, bringing tears to her eyes that froze almost instantly on her lashes. She was on the northern edge of the territory, a place reserved for the most grueling and least rewarding of tasks. Splitting wood in the maw of a coming blizzard was a punishment disguised as a chore. Everyone knew it. "Faster, Ghostfoot," a voice sneered behind her. Lyra. Of course, it was Lyra. Alara didn't turn. She focused on the weight of the axe, the ache in her shoulders a familiar companion. She heaved the heavy tool, bringing it down with a grunt. The wood stubbornly refused to split. A jarring vibration shot up her arms, rattling her teeth. "Pathetic," Lyra scoffed. Her boots, new and lined with rabbit fur, crunched on the snow. The scent of her expensive perfume, a cloying floral in the crisp winter air, made Alara's stomach clench. "Even a simple task is beyond you. No wonder you're an Omega. It's in your blood. Weakness." Alara gritted her teeth, the old shame burning hot in her chest. She was an orphan, a stray taken in by the Blackwood pack out of some long-forgotten sense of pity that had long since curdled into resentment. She had no family, no status, no worth. She was just another mouth to feed, a pair of hands to work until they bled. She repositioned the log, her breath pluming in a white cloud. She could feel Lyra's stare like a physical weight on her back. "The Alpha's son was asking about the wood supply," Lyra continued, her voice dripping with malicious glee. "I told him you were being lazy, that you were probably huddled behind the pile trying to sleep instead of work." A lie. A cruel, pointless lie. But it would be believed. Lyra was the daughter of the pack's beta. Alara was nothing. "He looked so disappointed," Lyra sighed theatrically. "You know how he values diligence." Alara swung the axe again, this time putting every ounce of her frustration, her cold, and her quiet desperation into the blow. The log split with a satisfying crack, sending two halves skittering across the frozen ground. She didn't feel the victory. She only felt the exhaustion that followed. Lyra laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "There. See what a little motivation can do? You should thank me." She kicked one of the split logs, sending it rolling into a snowdrift. "Now pick that up and get the rest done before the first flakes fall. I'd hate for you to get lost out here. Imagine the tragedy." The sarcasm was as sharp as the wind. Lyra turned and sauntered back toward the warmth and light of the longhouse, leaving Alara alone with the groaning pines and the bruised purple sky. For a moment, Alara let her head hang. The thought of just stopping, of letting the cold take her. It was a seductive whisper that came to her on the worst days. Just lie down in the snow. It would be quiet. It would be peaceful. It would be an end to the aching loneliness. No. The word was a flicker of flint in the darkness of her mind, a stubborn, tiny spark she had nurtured for years. They could call her worthless. They could starve her and work her and mock her. But she would not break. She would not give them the satisfaction of finding her frozen corpse in the morning. She gritted her teeth, the muscles in her jaw screaming. She pushed forward despite the pain in her hands, despite the ice in her veins. She would survive this. She always did. She picked up the log Lyra had kicked away, her raw fingers protesting. She would survive because it was the only form of defiance she had left. The blizzard did not wait. The first flakes, fat and wet, began to fall long before she was finished. They melted on her face, mingling with the frozen tears of her frustration. The wind began to howl, no longer just cutting, but screaming through the trees, tearing at her cloak. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. The path back to the longhouse was already becoming indistinct. The world was dissolving into a churning vortex of white. She abandoned the woodpile, grabbing the small handcart and piling what she'd managed to split onto it. It was less than half of what was expected, but it was better than nothing. Better than freezing to death for the sake of obedience. Pulling the cart was a nightmare. The narrow wheels sank into the rapidly deepening snow. Every step was a battle against the wind and the sucking grip of the drifts. Her world shrank to the burning in her lungs and the screaming of her muscles. She stumbled, her foot catching on a hidden root. The cart tipped, spilling her precious cargo. The logs, dark shapes against the snow, were swallowed almost instantly. A sob of despair tore from her throat. She fell to her knees, the cold soaking through the thin fabric of her trousers immediately. It was hopeless. Lyra would get her wish after all. She would be lost, a forgotten tragedy. She stayed there for a long moment, the snow piling up around her, a premature burial shroud. The spark of defiance within her was sputtering, drowning in a sea of white. Then she heard it. A howl. It was not the howl of a Blackwood wolf. It was deeper, more powerful. A sound that resonated not in her ears, but in the very marrow of her bones. It was a sound of absolute authority, of ancient power. It cut through the blizzard's roar like a thunderclap. Fear, primal and immediate, jolted her back to her feet. There were legends of rogue wolves, of ancient beasts that roamed the northern wastes. Monsters. She had to move. She scrambled, leaving the cart and the logs behind, and plunged into the trees, hoping for shelter. She didn't know which way she was going. Away. Away was the only direction that mattered. The forest was a maze of skeletal trees and swirling snow. She ran, blind and clumsy, branches whipping at her face, her lungs on fire. Another howl, closer this time, spurred her on. She burst through a thicket of firs and saw it, a cliff edge, a sheer drop into a churning white abyss. She skidded to a halt, her worn boots sliding on a patch of ice, her arms pinwheeled. For a terrifying, weightless second, she was falling. Strong hands grabbed her. They clamped onto her arm like bands of steel, yanking her back from the precipice with impossible strength. She stumbled, falling against a chest as hard and unyielding as a mountain. The world spun, a dizzying mix of white snow and black cloak. She looked up, gasping for breath, ready to thank her savior, and the words died in her throat. He was massive, a giant of a man clad in dark, heavy furs, with a presence that seemed to push back the storm itself. Snow clung to his broad shoulders and his dark hair, which was long and unbound. His face was all harsh angles and predatory beauty, a face carved from granite and winter. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of molten gold, burning with an intensity that stripped her bare. They were not human eyes. They were the eyes of the wolf she had heard. The alpha. He was looking at her not as a man looks at a woman, but as a predator looks at its prey. Or, no, it was something else. Something fiercer. Something that felt like recognition. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was him, the Alpha King, Kale, ruler of all the northern packs, a figure of myth and terror whispered about in her pack with a mixture of fear and awe. What was he doing here? On their land? His golden gaze dropped from her face to the point of contact, his gloved hand still crushing her upper arm. He was holding her so tightly it hurt, yet the pain was a distant thing, drowned out by the sheer, overwhelming force of his presence. You, he breathed, his voice a low rumble, deep as thunder. The single word seemed to echo in the sudden stillness around them. And then, a strange warmth bloomed where his hand held her. It was not the warmth of a body, but something more potent, something electric. It spread from her arm, a tingling fire racing through her veins, chasing away the deadly chill that had settled in her bones. She stared, bewildered, as he slowly, deliberately, pulled the thick leather glove from his hand. His fingers were long and calloused, a warrior's hands. He reached out, his bare fingertips brushing against the frozen skin of her cheek. The world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a cataclysm of light and heat and sensation that erupted inside her skull. White-hot energy seared through her, a lightning strike to her very soul. A scream was torn from her lips, but it was lost in the roar of power that consumed her. On her neck, just below her ear, an agonizing fire bloomed. It felt as if a brand was being pressed into her flesh, searing her to the bone. The pain was excruciating, blinding. She convulsed, her body arching against his other arm snaked around her waist, pulling her flush against him, holding her steady as the torrent of energy ripped through her. He held her not like a victim, but like an anchor. Through a haze of agony she saw his eyes. The gold had intensified, swirling with silver light, glowing with an impossible luminescence in the dim stormlight. He was watching the claiming mark burn itself into her skin, his expression one of savage, absolute possession. "Mine," he growled, the word a vibration against her skin, a promise and a verdict. Her mind, shattered by the onslaught, could only produce one coherent thought. What was happening to me? Her body, however, knew. Her instincts, buried under years of abuse and self-loathing, screamed a single, terrifying truth. Mate. The fire on her neck receded, leaving behind a tender, throbbing ache. The world slowly swam back into focus. She was still pressed against him, his scent filling her senses. Pine and winter storms and something else. Something uniquely his. Something that made her want to curl up and never leave. Her mind rebelled. This was insane. This was impossible. He was the Alpha King. She was Ash-Tongue, a worthless Omega, a ghost. This had to be a mistake. A cruel, feverish dream brought on by the cold. She tried to pull away, her limbs trembling and weak. "No," she whispered, the sound pathetic even to her own ears. His grip tightened, not painfully, but irrevocably. "There is no," he stated, his voice soft but absolute. He tilted her chin up with one finger, forcing her to meet his glowing gaze. "You're her. I've been waiting for you." Confusion and fear warred within her. Her body craved his closeness, drawn to him by a force she couldn't comprehend. But her mind, her scarred and cautious mind, screamed at her to run. This was a trap, a danger far greater than any blizzard. He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The motion was so fluid, so effortless, it left her breathless. He wrapped his heavy fur cloak around her, cocooning her in his warmth and scent. "I have you," he murmured, his lips brushing against her hair. "You are safe now." Safe? She had never been safe a day in her life. The concept was so foreign she didn't know how to process it. She felt the rumble in his chest as he began to walk, his long strides eating up the ground, seemingly oblivious to the storm that still raged around them. He carried her to a cave, a dark slash in the rock face she hadn't seen, hidden by a curtain of ancient ivy. Inside, a fire was already burning in a crude stone pit, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Two other men, large and grim-faced like their king, rose to their feet as he entered. They looked from his face to the bundle in his arms, and their eyes widened in shock. Cale ignored them. He carried her to a pile of furs near the fire and set her down gently. "Sit down," he commanded, his voice softer now. She obeyed numbly, her body still humming with the aftershocks of the bond. He knelt before her, his golden eyes scanning her from head to toe, a possessive, assessing gaze that made her skin prickle. He noted her thin cloak, her cracked hands, the gauntness of her cheeks. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a dangerous sound. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice deceptively quiet. She flinched, pulling her cloak tighter around herself. She couldn't answer. To speak against her pack, against Lyra, was a death sentence. He seemed to understand her silence. His jaw tightened. "It does not matter. They will not touch you again." He reached out and gently brushed his thumb over the tender skin of her neck where the mark was hidden beneath her collar. The spot pulsed with warmth at his touch. "No one will." The days that followed were a blur of confusion and fear. Cale took her from the cave, from Blackwood territory, without a word to her alpha. He simply took her. His men, his royal guard, treated her with a baffling reverence, calling her Luna in hushed tones. They rode hard, heading north, to his fortress, his capital, Frostguard. The fortress was not a castle of fairy tale stone, but a bastion of dark timber and black iron, built into the side of a mountain. It was imposing, terrifying, and yet, strangely, it felt more like a home than the Blackwood longhouse ever had. Inside, she was given chambers that were larger than the entire Omega dormitory. A fire always burned in the hearth. There were furs on the floor so thick her feet sank into them. Servants brought her food, hot, savory meals that made her want to weep. They brought her clothes made of soft wool and velvet, in deep blues and greens. She felt like an imposter, a crow dressed in a swan's feathers. Every night, Cale came to her chambers. He never pushed, never demanded. He would simply sit with her by the fire, sometimes speaking of his lands and his people, other times sitting in a comfortable silence. He was teaching her, she realized, that his presence was not a threat. But the self-doubt was a cancer in her soul. She would catch her reflection in the polished silver of a water pitcher and see the same worthless girl. Ash-tongue, ghost-foot. How could he look at her and see a queen? His Luna. The bond was a constant, humming presence under her skin, a strange, undeniable pull toward him. But she fought it. She couldn't accept it. It was a mistake. Sooner or later, he would realize it too. He would see her for what she was and cast her aside. The fall from this height would kill her. A strange restlessness grew within her, a pull not just to Cale, but to something else. Something within the fortress itself. It was a low, thrumming vibration she felt in her teeth, a whisper at the edge of her hearing. It drew her from her rooms, down winding corridors of stone and wood. She followed the feeling for days, exploring the fortress in the quiet hours before dawn. The pull grew stronger, leading her deep into the mountain's heart, to a section of the keep that was heavily guarded. A massive ironwood door, bound with silver runes, blocked her path. The vault. The pull was a siren song now, emanating from behind that door. It felt familiar. It felt like a missing piece of herself. One night, her self-doubt warring with this inexplicable need, she made a decision. She had to know what was in there, and maybe, just maybe, she could find something to help her escape. Something valuable to buy her passage far away from here, before Cale realized his mistake and her heart shattered completely. She was a ghost, after all. She knew how to move unseen. She slipped past the guards during their change, a shadow in the torchlight. The silver runes on the door sizzled at her proximity, a faint hum of protest. She reached out a trembling hand, expecting to be repelled, but the moment her fingers touched the cold iron, the runes flared with a gentle, welcoming blue light. The heavy lock clicked open on its own. Her breath hitched. She pushed the door open and slipped inside. The vault was not filled with gold and jewels. It was a repository of artifacts, of ancient weapons and scrolls stored on stone shelves. The air was thick with the scent of age and ozone, and in the center of the room, on a pedestal of obsidian, lay the source of the call. It was an amulet, a simple, elegant disc of what looked like polished moonlight, suspended on a delicate silver chain. It pulsed with a soft internal light, the same blue as the runes on the door. She was drawn to it, her feet moving without her consent. This was it. This was what she had been feeling. It felt like coming home. It felt like hers. She reached out, her fingers hovering over its cool surface. She was taking back what was hers. The thought was bizarre, nonsensical, yet it felt profoundly true. She was not stealing. She was reclaiming. I wondered how long it would take you to find your way here. The voice, deep and calm, came from the doorway. Ilara froze, her hands snatching back as if burned. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Cale stood there, framed by the open door, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He was not angry. His golden eyes were soft, filled with a look of profound, aching tenderness. He did not see a thief. He saw her. I'm sorry, she stammered, shame washing over her. I didn't mean... I was just looking. You were not just looking, he said, his voice gentle. He walked slowly into the room, his gaze never leaving hers. You were answering. It has been calling to you since the moment you arrived. He stopped beside the pedestal, his presence filling the small space. He looked down at the amulet, then back at her. It belongs to you, Ilara. She stared at him, bewildered. What? No, that's impossible. I'm nobody. You are not nobody, he said, his voice firm, cutting through her litany of self-hatred. You are the last of the lunar line. That amulet is the moonstone. It belonged to your mother. The world tilted on its axis. My mother? She whispered. She knew nothing of her parents, only that they were gone. Her name was Liana, Cale said, his voice taking on a reverent tone. She was the high priestess of a coven of powerful magic wielders, guardians of the balance between our world and the spirit realm. They drew their power from the moon itself. They were thought to have been wiped out decades ago during the Purge. He reached out and picked up the amulet. The stone glowed brighter in his hand. Your mother entrusted this to my father for safekeeping before she went into hiding. She knew her enemies were hunting her. She wanted to ensure that if anything happened to her, her daughter, her legacy, would be protected. He held it out to her. It is keyed to your blood, Ilara. Only you could have opened that door. Only you can wield its power. She looked from the glowing stone to his earnest face. It was too much. A forgotten legacy? A magical bloodline? It sounded like a children's story. But why me? Why was I left with the Blackwood pack? Why was I like this? She gestured to herself, to the invisible rags and ingrained dirt she still felt she wore. To hide you, Cale said, his voice laced with a grim fury. To hide you in plain sight. What better place for the last heir of a powerful magical line than as a worthless omega in a backwater pack? No one would ever look for you there. No one would ever suspect. It all clicked into place. The whispers, the pull, the way the bond had formed so explosively. Her entire life had been a lie, a cage designed to keep her small and unseen. There is a prophecy, Cale continued, his voice low. It speaks of a time when the Ember Covenant, a faction who seeks to consume all magic for themselves, would rise under a Shadow King, and that he could only be defeated when the last daughter of the moon claimed her power and joined with the Alpha of Alphas. He looked at her, his golden eyes burning with conviction. The prophecy is about us, Ilara. Before she could process it, before she could even begin to accept the monumental truth he had laid before her, A horn blew from the ramparts above, a single, frantic blast. An attack. Cale's head snapped up, a vicious growl ripped from his chest. "Vorlag," he snarled. He grabbed her arm. He must have sensed the amulet's activation. "He's here." He thrust the moonstone into her hands. "Put it on. Do not take it off." He pulled her from the vault, shouting orders to his guards as they ran. The fortress was in chaos. The sounds of battle, the clash of steel, the roar of enraged wolves, echoed through the stone halls. Vorlag's forces, the Ember Covenant, were pouring over the walls. They were wraith-like figures in black armor, wielding blades that glowed with a malevolent orange light, like dying coals. They moved with unnatural speed, their eyes burning with the same dark fire. Cale shoved Alara behind him as two of the Covenant soldiers burst through a side passage. He met them with a roar, his hands shifting, elongating into vicious black claws. He moved in a blur of fur and fury, a whirlwind of destruction. He tore through them in seconds, their dark armor shattering like glass. He was magnificent, terrifying. He was the Alpha King, and this was his rage. He led her toward the main courtyard, where the fighting was thickest. His royal guard, massive wolves in both their forms, were holding the line, but they were outnumbered. At the center of the chaos stood a tall, imposing figure in obsidian plate armor, a horned helmet obscuring his face. In his hand, he held a great sword that pulsed with black and red energy. Lord Vorlag, the Shadow King. "Cale!" Vorlag's voice was a rasp, like stone grinding on stone. "You have something that belongs to me. Give me the girl and the stone, and I will grant you a quick death." "You will have neither," Cale roared, shoving Alara behind a thick stone pillar. "Stay here," he commanded, and then he launched himself into the fray. Alara watched in terrified awe as Cale transformed. His body contorted, growing, sprouting thick black fur. In a heartbeat, the man was gone, replaced by a monstrous wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, with eyes of burning gold. He was a creature of pure, primal power, and he crashed into Vorlag's lines like a tidal wave. She clutched the moonstone in her hand, its smooth, cool surface a stark contrast to the terror racing through her veins. Her mother's legacy. A queen's power. It felt like a lie. She was just Alara, just Ashtongue. What could she do? The battle raged. Cale was a force of nature, but Vorlag was his equal. Their fight was the epicenter of the storm, a clash of shadow and light, of ice and ember. The ground shook with the force of their blows. A stray bolt of dark energy from Vorlag's sword missed Cale and slammed into the pillar Alara was hiding behind. The stone exploded, showering her with razor-sharp shrapnel. She cried out, stumbling back, her arms sliced open and bleeding. Cale heard her cry. His head whipped around, his golden eyes finding hers. That split second of distraction was all Vorlag needed. The Shadow King's sword lunged, catching Cale in the shoulder. The great wolf roared in pain, staggering back, dark blood steaming from the wound. Vorlag laughed, a chilling, triumphant sound. He raised his sword for the killing blow, seeing Cale hurt, seeing him in danger because of her. It broke something inside Alara. The fear, the doubt, the years of believing she was worthless. It all burned away, incinerated by a sudden, volcanic surge of pure, protective rage. Mine. The word was not a thought. It was a declaration. It was the bond, her soul, screaming its truth. He was hers to protect. Her fingers clenched around the moonstone. She lifted the chain over her head, letting the amulet fall against her chest. The moment it touched her skin, power erupted from her. It was not a fire, but a flood, a tidal wave of pure, silver-white light that exploded outwards from her body. It was cool and clean and absolute. The light slammed into the Ember Covenant soldiers, and they screamed, their dark magic dissolving, their burning blades extinguishing as if doused by water. The light did not kill them, but it scoured the darkness from them, leaving them dazed and powerless on the ground. The entire courtyard was bathed in her ethereal, lunar glow. The fighting stopped. Everyone, Kale's guard, Vorlag's men, Vorlag himself, stared at her. She was no longer cowering. She stood tall, her head held high, the wound on her arm already sealing itself with silver light. Her eyes, once a timid gray, now blazed with the same luminous power as the stone on her chest. The wind whipped her hair around her, and in that moment, she was not Ashtongue. She was not a ghost. She was a queen. "You," Vorlag hissed, turning his full attention to her. The horned helmet couldn't hide the shock and fury in his voice. "The lunar line. You were supposed to be extinct." "You were wrong," Alara said. Her own voice surprised her. It was clear, steady, and resonant with power. She took a step forward, then another. The light followed her, originating from her. She walked past Kale, who had shifted back to his human form, clutching his shoulder, his golden eyes wide with awe and pride. She faced the Shadow King. This creature, this man who had hunted her bloodline, who had tried to murder her mate. The rage inside her was a cold, focused thing now. "You call me worthless," she said, her voice ringing across the silent courtyard. It was not just to him. It was to Lyra, to the Blackwood Pack, to the entire world that had tried to crush her. "You thought I was nothing, a piece in your game, a tool to be used." She raised a hand, and the silver light coalesced around it, forming a shimmering, ethereal blade. "I am Alara of the Lunar Line, and you will never touch what is mine again." Vorlag roared in defiance and charged, his dark sword swinging. Alara met his charge. She did not have his strength or his training, but she had something more. She had the power of the moon, the legacy of generations flowing through her veins. Her blade of light met his sword of shadow. There was no clang of steel. There was only the sound of 1,000 whispers as light consumed darkness. Vorlag's sword dissolved into black smoke. The light from her blade washed over him, and he screamed as his obsidian armor cracked and fell away, his dark power unraveling like a threadbare cloak. He collapsed, a broken man, stripped of his stolen magic. Silence descended on the courtyard. The battle was over. Alara stood over the defeated Vorlag, her chest heaving, the light from the moonstone slowly softening. She lowered her hand, and the blade of light dissipated. The power was still there, a warm, steady hum beneath her skin, but the rage was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. She turned, and her eyes found Kale. He was already moving toward her, his shoulder healing at a rapid rate, but his limp was still pronounced. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of her. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and cupped her cheek. His thumb traced the curve of her jaw. His golden eyes were filled with a universe of emotion, awe, relief, pride, and a love so deep and fierce it stole her breath. "You are magnificent," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. A tear slipped down her cheek, a tear not of sorrow, but of release. "You were hurt." "It is nothing," he said, pulling her into his arms. He buried his face in her hair, holding her so tightly she felt her bones might fuse with his. "I knew you were strong, Alara. I just didn't know if you knew." She melted against him, her arms wrapping around his waist, holding on just as tightly. "I do now," she murmured into his chest. He pulled back just enough to look at her. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of reverence. It was a promise, a homecoming, a sealing of their souls. As their lips met, The claiming mark on her neck burned with a sudden, pleasant heat. She felt the bond between them surge, no longer a one-way current from him to her, but a circle of power, flowing from both of them, through both of them. She felt a prickling heat on the back of his neck, in the same spot as her own mark. She pulled back and looked. There, against his tanned skin, a matching mark was forming, a delicate, glowing silver tracery, a mirror of her own. A symbol that she had claimed him just as fiercely as he had claimed her. He touched it, a look of wonder on his face. "You claimed me back," he breathed. "You are mine, Kale," she said, the words feeling as natural as breathing. "As I am yours." A slow smile spread across his face, a smile like the sunrise after a long, dark night. It transformed his harsh features into something breathtakingly beautiful. In the days that followed, Frostguard was repaired. Vorlag and his remaining followers were imprisoned deep within the mountain. The story of the battle, of the lost Lunar Queen's return, spread like wildfire through the northern territories. Kale did not wait. He gathered his people in the great hall of the fortress. It was a cavernous space, filled with hundreds of his warriors, his council, his pack. They all watched as he led Ilara to the dais, where 2 thrones carved from weirwood and stone sat. He stood before them, his arms securely around her waist, a silent declaration of ownership and partnership. "For centuries our people have been strong," he began, his voice booming through the hall. "We have endured the harshest winters and defeated the darkest foes, but we have been incomplete. The prophecy spoke of a union of sun and moon, of wolf and light, that would secure our future for 1,000 years. He turned to Ilara, his gaze softening. "They called her worthless. They tried to hide her light in the shadows. But her soul called to mine across mountains and through storms. Her power rose to defend us when all seemed lost." He took her hand and raised it for all to see. "This is Ilara of the lunar line, my mate, my bond, your queen." A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by a deafening roar of approval. They stamped their feet and beat their fists against their chests, a thunderous, primal display of fealty. They were not just accepting her, they were celebrating her. Ilara looked out at the sea of faces, strong, fierce, loyal people. Her people. She felt Kale's warmth beside her, the steady thrum of the bond connecting them, the gentle weight of the moonstone on her chest. She was not Ash-Tongue. She was not Ghostfoot. She was not worthless. She was home. She was loved. She was queen. And as she met Kale's glowing, golden gaze, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her life had just begun. The long winter of her soul was over, and the sun and the moon were finally rising. She smiled, a true, brilliant smile, and squeezed her king's hand. He squeezed back, a silent promise of the life they would build together, a life of power, of purpose, and of a love that had defied prophecies and conquered shadows, a love that was, finally and truly, hers.